Welcome to the Journey to Union podcast. I'm Alex.
I'm Kate. This is a podcast about growing healthy relationships, learning how to live in truth, light and love with self and other.
So this week we will be talking about Phoenix and what that concept means to us, and as part of this process that we've been going through ourselves and trying to bring others along on the journey. On our first podcast, we talked about kintsugi, which was repairing the broken pieces. So I'm going to start with asking you a question, Kate. As we're talking about, what is Phoenix? How have you seen the concept of the Phoenix apply to us in this way of being then?
So if we look at the Phoenix as a second step, if you will, in this process, the first process, kintsugi, was about the brokenness and exposing the truth in the brokenness. So Phoenix is the legend of the great bird of the phoenix rising from the ashes. So the idea that the bird represents truth and choice. So for me, the phoenix here is us looking at what did we do next once we'd sat in pain, which I think was 5-6 days as a process for us.
From the initial ceremony. Yeah.
It was then a case of going, well, how do we choose to take this forward? There's still bits of our relationship that worked. It wasn't all broken in that sense. So what did we want to take forward? What did we choose to take forward? But also, what did we want to rewrite? And that was a lot of undoing as well as choosing, wasn't it? Because those patterns that we'd fall into, you don't necessarily know that you're in them until it's too late.
Awareness, isn't it? I think is part of that. You need to be aware of your patterns first before you can act upon them.
I think in that process, we came to realise how implicit we had been living. And even down to kind of marriage vows, when we then started to think about, well, what do those actually mean? Are they words that have an input on us, an impact on us? Yeah. Or are they just words to say for words' sake? So it was then about how do we make our communication more explicit? How do we understand ourselves more explicitly? And then how do we navigate that together? Yeah. It's about rewriting rules. It's about choice. It's about rising up from that place and choosing to move forward, which was a really scary part of the process, actually, wasn't it? Because we didn't know how to navigate new land when everything felt broken.
I think people fear change quite naturally anyway. Change is always unnatural, and actually when you realise that's the constant state, I think this was a fear even yourself maybe had to go through, like realising, and maybe you think, when things are good, appreciate them, because change happens constantly and things are constantly destroyed in this sense, and I think you have to sometimes rebuild from the small things to the larger things. I completely understand that the rebirthing I think is what Phoenix means. I think truly in this concept is it was the painful immolation of something into something new, as you say, and what's born from that carries through those pieces that you say weren't entirely destroyed. The kintsugi elements of, you're right, we were more dysfunctional than I think, like hating each other, and that we weren't sort of espousing that sort of energy at each other, but and it's been an interesting...
I don't know, there were a few moments after that initial...
Yes, I suppose. No, and hearing the truth for the first time, I think, in that very brutal way, which we opened in ceremony, because you've sort of said it was the 5-6 days was the Phoenix process from opening the ceremony and engaging that process of living in truth. I think that was where we fully knew each other for the first time, and you realise, oh crap, we've been living together for years, and this is the first time I've truly heard everything. Even things that, as you say, cause triggers, cause hurt in the moment. I
think that was the other part of it, isn't it? It's sitting with uncomfortable parts of each other. So things that might not be something that attracts you to that person. It might be something that really, in a way, repels you from them, but it's about living or acknowledging even those parts.
And whether that, I suppose that's like, because you say it could just be they've been behaving in such a way that is causing repulsion, not you're repulsed by them in that sense, I think. But there's many attributes and things you can be attracted or repulsed to. And I agree with you in that sense, yeah.
So I think rewriting the rules in terms of what we wanted going forward in choice um, was as much about unpacking the conditioning around what we felt society deemed a relationship should be, or a marriage should
where
be.
you pick up these lessons from, isn't it? Yes, because you're right. I mean, even if you don't, like, I don't know, and this might be a bit stereotypical, but girls, I would argue, women tend to think about this stuff more than men do in the sense of settling down, and especially when young, maybe. I'd say that's probably being very stereotypical, but there is that trope, at least anyway, isn't there? And you're right. And like, you had maybe had particular thoughts going into a marriage or a relationship even from a young age, and I also maybe had no thoughts, so it's just as bad from the other end, is what I'm trying to say. Is that whether you're somebody who has thought about this stuff, you have expectations, or whether you're somebody who hasn't thought about this stuff, well, then you have no expectations. You're right, having expectations of where relationships come from, and realizing that's mostly echoed from your immediate experiences as a child. The relationships you see from your grandparents, the relationships you see from your parents, your friends around you, maybe,
I think even if you don't have explicit expectations, you therefore have implicit ones, because your social learned behavior about how you've experienced. You said this the other day about your home growing up and the role your mum would play in the house, and therefore that expectation of what a wife would be or should be doesn't necessarily mean it was right or it was wrong, but that was your experience, so you can't
and everyone
undo
has
that
different
programming.
ones. Yeah, exactly. Yes, because I think at that time we were comparing what your expectations were and where they had come from, and it's the realization of like, oh, it's only just what I've observed has led to maybe my expectations. And I think that can also be observed, as I say, from many places. Culture and media certainly would play a part on the wider sort of aspects that influence us as well, just as well as those initial close relationships.
Unpicking that, though, has been quite a journey, hasn't it? In terms of understanding each of our programmings and why they clash and why they've led us to the point they led us to. But then rewriting that has been really powerful, because trying to put all that conditioning aside, what do we actually want from each other? What do we want from our relationship? What do we want for our family? And being able to craft that from I'm not going to say a clean slate, because you still always carry that with you,
past experience,
a conscious slate and a conscious choice. The first step into that was really kind of understanding what we wanted and what we needed from ourselves and from each other. And therefore, how do we foresee that playing out into the union that we now live in? So what for you was the biggest thing that you realised you needed or wanted from us in a relationship that perhaps we weren't having or didn't act upon consciously before we went into this process?
We talked about this in the last one, actually. I remember we vaguely mentioned, there were various sort of ways we needed to be seen. And I think when it came to this part of the process, it was more, as you say, self-discovery. And I feel even my own observations of you at this point would be the same. It required like, I'm struggling with words now. Like, it required an internal articulation of feelings and desires, maybe wants, things we need, as you say. It was varied in knowing us, know thyself, whatever the phrase is, that's famously quoted from someone. Knowing yourself is the first step to then be able to communicate that to somebody who I suppose you're more intimate with. And realizing that, because I think also that changes. We do grow and evolve, and sometimes we outgrow people, and that's an unfortunate part of life. Sometimes there are people we keep around us that hold us back. So I think it's being part of a union, more specifically, if you're deciding to enter into this. You have to know the person you're with is willing to put in the graft and the work of self-awareness and knowing the self first. And then it's just evolving from when you know yourself, you know what you'll stand for, what you won't stand for. And that's where boundaries and being explicit in communication comes in. And that doesn't mean compromise doesn't exist still. Of course, you still have to navigate, and there might be, times where you realize, oh, for this thing to be fulfilled, something else has to be fulfilled.
So how do you start to understand what it is you want and what you truly need explicitly? How do you go about that process? Because
Mm.
I know there are people that want to know what their other partner wants or needs, and when they ask them, they hit a brick wall.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of an annoying one because you're right. To know what somebody else wants, I think, is almost an impossibility. You can't get inside someone's head. You have to. There is unfortunately this element of life where we have to we can't see inside the other person's head. We can't actually directly control people. We have to influence, and we have to there is that level of not knowing. And you're right. I think if we thought about that, it'd drive us mad if we thought about it deeply enough. You can never truly know what's going on inside someone's head. So I think this is where you just have to have deeper and more honest conversations with the other half, and it is a journey of, it's also not judging and shaming. I think this is the other big part of it, is not the judging and shaming the other person for voicing something. I think often even you've spoken of being shut down by me or other men in your past experiences. And it's keeping, even the tone of voice, I realize, in how we communicate in those moments, it's more about how it's done than what it is, maybe. I'm trying to think of the question you originally asked me and how best to answer it. You asked me how
do we go about knowing what you need?
Oh, that was it. So it is really just finding all the ways you would go about self-awareness. It might mean going and having experiences. It might mean, and actually I'd say that's maybe in the last year or so of living in this way, the way we've reinforced that on the, obviously you're talking about different events here. We're talking about, living in this Phoenix way during our ceremony. There was that very, explicit time where it was very raw, but then there's also times where you've put yourself in an experience, and then after the experience of maybe getting burned by that experience, metaphorically, you come away and you rebirth it on that smaller scale. So I think it operates in many different ways. So maybe the how is having to experience it sometimes, and that experience might be just a difficult conversation. It might be going and actually doing something together. It might be going and do something apart. It could just be going, to the mountains to find yourself type thing. I think knowing yourself, how do you, like I said, I think before in our first podcast, part of knowing yourself is the therapy sessions, it's the meditation, it's the journaling, it's the just experiencing things, so you go, oh, that's what I like, that's what I don't like.
I suppose it's easier to start with, we often know what we don't want. And it's probably easier to rattle off a list of things we don't want, usually because to get to this point, something has gone wrong or something's happened that you no longer will tolerate or have a boundary for. We talk about this sometimes, don't we, in terms of thinking about the complete opposite. So if you know and fully aware there's something you don't want, so there's a past behaviour that occurred within our relationship that we now explicitly both know is a hard boundary, and that's not behaviour that I would accept or want again. But what is the opposite of that? Well, actually, sometimes it's really difficult to think, well, what's the opposite of that? Isn't it? Because it might have been an event you hadn't thought would happen or that you had ever even programmed to be possible. So thinking about, well, what the exact opposite is more that, for me, that connecting to that feeling of, but what do I feel when that did happen? So what's the opposite feeling? And what do I want, and what do I need from you, and from me? But I suppose when we're talking about living in union, it's about the impact of the other as well as yourself.
I think that's just avoiding triggers and things that would cause repeated cycles. Like if there's, because actually you're right. What I think you're getting at here is where, when we've boiled these things down, you're right, there's something it's like the event, like you say, what's the exact opposite? And to you, what the exact opposite might just be, oh, I need safety. It doesn't matter what the thing is, like, oh, I just need to feel safe in this moment. You might be able to go and do the thing or the behavior or whatever it is you wanted to do, as long as I feel safe and secure and know there's not going to be some sort of turbulence down the line, or it's not going to lead to some unwanted behavior, then yes, I think that's where you have to sort of experiment and try things. And that can be hard as well, because that can cause more pain. And you can be right back where you started. It can almost feel like, so yeah, I think it's a delicate balance. And I must admit, yeah, it is this weird thing of, it's a balance of knowing yourself alongside understanding the other, because I think that's what you can know yourself, but you can only ever understand the other side. And I think we have changed some of our language. I think I said this before as well, like, we've changed some of the language we use with each other to ask better questions, get better answers. I think I used to always ask, oh, what's the matter? And of course you could list off 1,000 things of what's the matter, but when I ask you how are you feeling, you describe the emotion underneath, and then I know how to respond better. So things like that. It's asking better questions allows you to respond better, I suppose.
I think that you mentioned earlier about shame and judgment, and I think we carry so much shame, not only for ourselves. I think it's easier to think about judgment of other than it is about shame of self. And I think often we think about people shaming us. And we've talked this through quite a lot of times. Don't always agree, but in the idea that can somebody actually shame you, or is shame an internal feeling that we feel? And I think when you're...
Well, this is the variant of guilt as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and when you're feeling to know what you want and what you need to make better choices to move forward, it's really starting to remove the shame on self for whatever it is those wants and needs. So again, that idea of kind of being needy, for me, brings up very negative connotations. So to deal with actually having a need that is to be fulfilled by you, I have to remove the shame of the fact that I need to ask for that. And that asking holds shame.
Yes, it's not even the actual shame of the thing or whatever it is you may be asking for. It's literally the process of asking is where you feel shamed. Yes, and you're right. And I'm sure this is what we're starting to realize in knowing ourselves better through this process. Because you're right, it's actually hard for us to maybe think back and think, how did we think before this? Because we have shifted quite 180 in our methods, I think. So you have to sort of think, how did I used to think that caused problems? Because now I've stopped thinking like that because it caused problems.
So when feeling shame around self and self choices, it's learning to sit with that and feel that, as well as articulate that to the other person. And often that can be really difficult, because trying to articulate when you do that, I feel shame, can actually make the other person get quite defensive and go, I haven't done that to shame you, or I haven't,
or start justifying all the reasons when the person doesn't need a justification. They just need you to acknowledge that that's how they've made them feel. It's like, okay, great, I can deal with that and move forward, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah,
but it's also important to articulate that, isn't it? Because again, if you're not articulating the feeling that's coming up in a conversation with somebody, then you're not living in truth. It's not just the emission of truth, it's also, well, what are the feelings and thoughts around the conversation? And I think that's, for me, was a process about embodying those feelings and emotions to the point where that I really couldn't not bring them to you, because I was feeling them, and I was feeling them all the way through my body.
Yeah, it wasn't your mind playing tricks. You knew this was a
and leaning into feelings, be they feelings of shame, feelings of happy, feelings of excitement, arousal, whatever they are. If you are truly tuning into your feelings, then you can't not bring them to the other person, because
they're being felt anyway subconsciously. The voicing and talking about it is actually the last part that just makes it explicit and clear, like you say, like verbal communication. And I suppose to be good at verbal communication, you also have to be good at speaking words, and that's maybe the first step really as well, isn't it? It's being able to get better words. That's a good sentence. You get better words, but you know what I mean.
But that doesn't mean fancy language. That doesn't mean complicated words, does it? That means using
speaking
language that really means what you feel. And if you don't have the language, articulating as best you can,
gesturing, showing,
having clarity around the language you do have.
That's true. Even defining your own words and what that truly means, and even if it's a long-winded conversation, once you know that, that's useful information. Yes. How often do couples, I mean, we maybe do this, you assume one argument from the other side, or one position, you expect the person to behave in a certain way, and when they don't, you're shocked as to why they didn't. And then when he goes, well, I didn't know that, or whatever the excuse is, we make
it's assumptions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not that assumptions are wrong. I mean, one assumption that we had to face at certain part of our journey a long time ago was when we had children and dinner time. So for me, dinner time, it was a real family event. We sat around a table together. It was part of something we did together. And so when we had children, that was an assumption that that's how dinner time happens, whereas it really wasn't your experience growing up. And not that it makes it right or wrong, but it was I was wondering why you weren't supporting the thing that I was trying to do.
Yeah, it just wasn't.
And
second
you just
nature to
had
me.
no knowledge that that's the thing that I was trying to do. It's that assumption because of our experience.
Yes, that was it. Yes, it was literally just our experiences were different growing up. So that had led to different assumptions about how we'd parent, about how we'd operate in a relationship, about how we'd run our households, as you say. Like, yeah, and this doesn't get spoken about, I suppose, between couples very often, I wonder. And you're right, we just assume the other wants the other. But I think we have this tendency to feel that everyone thinks like us, and it's this realization that no, we're all quite unique in our thought processes, and we all have different ways of personifying these sort of different, and you could say voices in your head, and that makes you sound crazy, but everyone has their own different monologues and different, sort of ways of expressing. And I think this is quite natural. I think we've known about this in different, you read stuff from the 1800s and you hear about the various, methods of psychopathy. I can't say that, psychopathy. And, and how, what they'd assume people had, when you think actually comparing it to modern day, what we know about the brain, you think actually this is just how people sort and organize things, and we might feel possessed by certain things, whereas actually it's just a mood or an emotion, or it's all linked to our hormone system. And, when we understand the science behind some of this stuff and what actually causes us to be in these states, you realize that, personifying these things allows you to express them better, because you can have a relationship with this part of ourselves that can be your own body. You're right, and you're feeling tumultuous and you're feeling Eeyorish or whatever these words are, and you're right, you personify these animals. You can say, oh, he's grumpy like a bear. Like we put these personifications around them because there's truth to them. We embody these sort of creatures, and we've had these little sort of own language ourselves that I suppose has developed more over the years now.
I was going to say, what do you actually mean by personifying the voices? Because, well, we all have different voices, don't we? But I think for us, when we think about embodying emotion, the ability to personify helps explain, helps describe to the other person what this voice is feeling, what's it telling you, what's it thinking, because it isn't you, it's a part of you, it's a voice, a thought pattern. And so we have, I don't know how to explain Dave's.
Well, you have Dave's.
One personification that we've worked with probably since around this time of going into union is a doubtful voice, a voice towards past behaviour.
It's kind of wrapped up with your anxieties. Dave is your defense mechanism against bullshit, essentially. He's the thing that keeps a long list of all the transgressions anyone may have ever done against you, and he's prickly and defensive when he wants to be. He's a hedgehog. Dave the hedgehog. I don't know why Dave was just stuck
I don't know why Dave.
No, I mean it's his dad's name, but that's got no reference. No, and Dave is just this big prickly hedgehog. I imagine him as the hedgehog from Toy Story, Mr. Pricklesworth or whatever his name is, Toy Story 4, where that hedgehog. So I imagine a big version of that stomping around, and I wander into Dave fields when I talk about something that might trigger you, and there's Dave with his big clipboard going, oh, you remember this, do you? And he brings it up again. And so I think other people may resonate with that one. But we
just think we're totally lost.
Well, we're completely unstable. No, it's...
But it's about that process of embodying emotion, isn't it? Because when Dave raises kind of his head in my mind, it's a very real sensation. It's it's a trigger when usually it's around you actually, but when you do something that in the past, whether it's you or somebody else, has caused me pain or caused me sadness or loss.
It's not just me, although I cause many of the triggers, I think. Or I've learned to discover where we would have issues in our relationship because I was stomping through Dave fields without any care in the world. That's how I used to personify it. Was just like, I'm stomping through.
But I think everybody has this, don't they? Whatever your triggers are as a person, and everybody's triggers are different because of their lived experience. But whatever your triggers are, even if that's a trigger of loud noises or a trigger of somebody
it's a
giving
defense
you,
isn't it?
giving you praise even can be a trigger. It's that the personification of what is that immediate feeling that you feel. And for me, Dave's usually want to tell people to F off. He doesn't trust anyone. I don't feel like I want to be open to anyone. I don't want to be vulnerable. I want to shut myself away. And it's that prickliness. And he's
But you said why do we do this? And actually, I think the reason why is because, like you kind of alluded to, which was that it allows us to articulate it quicker and better, and it's a relatable, it's a complex set of emotions is actually what you're describing, and defense mechanisms, and it's all based around your nervous system, I imagine. Like if you think about it from a scientific point of view, but to think of that in the exact moment you're feeling that is really hard to say. So you just go, Dave's about, or I think Dave's or even just me noticing, going, oh, is Dave about? Okay, I'm realizing in you, and you're right. Like I think the ones for me were like a grumpy bear, and you realize there's a grumpy bear in the morning when he's like, and like he's not scary, but he can seem big.
To my little girl. Sometimes.
Yeah, this is what I mean. So it's realizing all these different energies and personifications or archetypes would play out. I mean, like the tyrant king, the addict, the lover. All these different archetypes that you can hear from different things. They all play out, and we've just given our own personal personifications, like you called them, to these things.
Yeah, and I think the benefit of doing that, whatever your trauma is, whatever the things are that you're having to sit with before you make the choice as to how to move forward, the benefit of being able to acknowledge those internal needs and shame and voices and feelings is not only they're easier to express to your other or to somebody else, but it also, it makes you understand self. It makes you think, okay, well, that's how I'm feeling. Fair enough. I acknowledge that. I sit with it. And
I was about to say, I don't know whether this is a good thing or not, because I understand that maybe from a psychological point of view, compartmentalization isn't great, but it does allow you to to separate. So the example I was thinking of was like, I don't know if anyone's watched the program Big Mouth, and then there's the Shame Wizard, or the Human Resources on Netflix. I don't know, that program where they had these different characters, and they had personified, the horn monster, the Shame Wizard, was it the anxiety mosquito? And I think these are actually very, although cartoonized for this program and made into kind of an adult joke show, it's actually a very real representation of some of these things that exist within our psyches. And I think, again, when people used to believe it in, possessions, and I think it's actually more just people taken by these, they're so controlled by their own mind that they act in ways that seem supernatural to us. Whereas actually it's all our psyche. It's all connected to our nervous system. It's how you're right, when people do experience traumatic things, we know this thing gets programmed. We know children up to the age of 7 are in a different form of brainwave where they can be programmed. It's very easy for us to be programmed as humans. And as you say, and allowing us to personify these voices allows us to, as I say, compartmentalize, but to step back and go, you're right, this is my shame wizard I'm experiencing, is the one I was thinking, I'm experiencing.
It doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it.
Yeah, exactly. Or the horn monster, like, oh, this is just my horn monster, like, goodness me, like, I need to get him in control, like, because he's acting out in ways that are causing pain and problem for others. And this is where you're saying having, even your days, as you say, like, it might be a defense mechanism that's kept you safe, but at the same time, it does keep you closed off when you need to be open with me. Or it might make you hostile towards me when I can't really understand why. And that's because, it's actually a trigger from a way past thing, that's happened to you, but has been a defense mechanism.
And that's their role. Their role is to protect you, whatever that is. And it might not feel like that, but their role is to protect you. And if you can tune into them and not ignore them, and personifying them has really helped me do that, has helped me tune into them and love them, one for a better expression, but has allowed me to acknowledge that they're there to protect, and they're there to bring up things you haven't healed through. And even now, when there's little things that trigger me that used to be huge things would trigger me, I'm able to acknowledge them as, okay, well, that's still there. There's obviously still something that's not been healed through, but I can see it for what it is. It's got a different power over me. And that's been really, really important on being able to choose how you move forward, because you can choose which voices you listen to. You can choose which personifications you allow to have louder voices and control. If you can understand the different pulls and feelings and emotions that you have.
I was about to say, is this emotional intelligence, would you call it? Yes. So, healing with emotional intelligence. Would you agree?
What does that mean to you?
Oh, I was asking you that. Yeah, no, that was, what does it mean? Healing with emotional intelligence. Well, it's exactly that, isn't it? It's emotional intelligence, a bit like, what's the opposite one? The one that's failing me right now. IQ. Yeah. Intelligence quota versus EQ. No, what's that? That's emotional quota, isn't it? They mean things, but the point being emotional intelligence versus actual intelligence, or what would you call that? What's logical intelligence? Yes, maybe that's it. Yes, emotional and logical.
Maybe we don't have any.
Maybe this is the logical intelligence has left the building. Yes, no, but we have these two sides, don't they? Left brain, right brain. Maybe I don't know if that's too simplified, but it's emotional side versus logical side, and yes, it's applying this sort of emotional intelligence to this healing, like realizing that it might not be logical to talk with a prickly hedgehog in your mind, but at the same time, that tool of personifying those thoughts and feelings allows us to talk in a way that doesn't necessarily directly attack. You're not directly attacking the person. You're talking about a personified group of behaviors.
It comes from understanding, doesn't it? The emotional intelligence. I mean, Daniel Goleman leads a lot of the literature around emotional intelligence, and one of the things he talks about is understanding the other. So whoever it is you're communicating with, or to, or for, is, like you say in the example of the personification, is knowing which side of them you're being presented with, and therefore how to acknowledge them, how to approach them, how to phrase questions or language, or and it's therefore understanding how I'm presenting my communication to you, but also my awareness of where you're at for me to approach you in the way I am.
I suppose that's listening as well, isn't it? In that sense, you're right. As much as it's communicating better, it's also listening and not reacting. I think even to yourself, you can hear a part of yourself and you can react, and like that would be addiction and normal behavior. You hear a part of yourself scream saying, I'm uncomfortable, I don't like this, I want to eat that sugary food, I want to, whatever it is, and we can emotionally react to that, or we can listen to that part and go, no, I hear you, but I'm choosing a different thing today. And that can be hard. I think that's the hardest thing ever, to hear those voices and not react. But that requires having yourself together, I suppose. And maybe that's one of the lessons of life, is piecing yourself together bit by bit and understanding which is something that's just a voice screaming at you because it doesn't feel loved, or is that just, an unmet need or an unmet want, and you realize you're not getting, and again, it might be that your partner can never give you that, there might be something fundamentally just not there, or they're not able to, or it might be completely impossible, that your thing, and you have to come to terms with that. Unreasonable, totally. No, there might actually be those cases where you're right, something is unreasonable. But if it is a true want, a true desire, and something that isn't just from some egotistical, tyrannical, I must have that, and it's a genuine thing you require for your being and your substance, then
how have we navigated that? Because
I don't know if we have anything like that extreme. I'm just trying to think like if anyone's listening and they sort of hear and they can't relate to that in that sense. But I don't know. I wouldn't say we've had any real extreme ones, because to me that's almost the compromise aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had different. Well, we often have different opinions and different viewpoints on things.
That's people, yeah.
But yeah, that's living with another person, isn't it? But I think we have different desires. I mean, for one, biologically, you're a man driven by different hormones than I as a woman. So that creates difference in wants and desires sometimes.
Yes, I would agree.
And so that's about going, well, okay, you want or desire this, I don't. So how do we navigate that? Because either that means you don't get what you want or need, or it means I don't get what I want or need. Naturally, that means neither of us get what we want or need.
Yeah, no, you're right. Okay, those experiences, I could say we've had some head-ons with. I think also it comes down to just navigating, well, that might mean changing some plans. It might be changing a routine. It might be actually carving out some explicit time to do, like, I mean, for us, this might have been a bit based on, codependency thing, but realizing that, you can go away for a weekend and not be together. And that's not like you're abandoning each other. It depends, what your relationship is. For us, that was something we realized we spend a lot of time together actually, but how much of that is quality time versus just being around each other. And then I know there's other couples who don't spend any time together, and I find that weird. That's my own perspective. But at the same time, everyone has a different dynamic, and I think that's the point. No, I mean, I say that quite condescendingly, don't I? That it's weird, but no, what I mean is it's not normal for me. And this is like, say, you need to know what's your normal. But I know for a while there are times where you're right. We have different expectations, and how do we navigate those? Yeah, I think it is like I said earlier about experiencing. You have to sometimes work out, well, we'll try it this way, and if it works, and it's maybe like a week by week basis, we try this stuff sometimes. This week we'll try doing this, and we'll carve out time here for this, and if that works, great. And also understanding that sometimes it ebbs and flows, and sometimes there may be an immediate desire for something, and you spend an entire month doing that thing, and then the month after you're like, oh no, okay, I've done that thing now, and or whatever it was, or like, and
it's fulfilled.
It's fulfilled, yeah, exactly. Or even just realizing, I think this was with some of the more sexual stuff for me, I was realizing there may have been like once it got to a certain point, it was like, oh no, I realized I am quite satisfied sexually, and it was like we had changed, obviously, the quality or whatever it was that we were getting from those interactions, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't need it at the same level I thought I used to need it, and it was like, oh, okay, and that calmed down in me, and that part of me became more controllable, I suppose. The horn monster, if you want to give it a name. Yeah,
more peaceful. I think not necessarily even controllable. It's more peace at ease, because whatever the need is, it doesn't have to be sexual in that sense. For me, no, I know. But for me, I suppose more emotional needs or desires, maybe not more, but equally, is actually there's really intense experiences and can sometimes make that need feel very seen and very fulfilled. And we know that when something feels seen, truly seen in the light and in love, then it dissipates just as quickly as it arrives sometimes. But that requires you to know what your needs are and what your desires are.
Yes, and I think it's a fine line between being flippant in your choices and jumping from what appeases you to the next at the same time, is actually genuinely having your desires and needs met. You're right, when someone fulfills you so fully that you just like, you can't even comprehend, like, wow, how did I go without, like, how was I in such a place of lack? Whereas I realized, like, nothing, because you're right, nothing has particularly changed in some of these dynamics, but it's just as if the quality and the energy behind it maybe is the better word.
Intention,
almost. Like it just feels like the correct flow of energy between us, and it doesn't feel draining. And I think that's actually been one of the big indicators of whether something has been on the right track or not. Is this draining to me? Is this fulfilling me with energy? And if we can fulfill each other, as you say, it might be that a particular act or a thing that I do for you as a genuine love thing that you require is draining to me. But if I give that without a place of
needing, wanting,
no, like expecting something in return. So if I give without the expectation, knowing that it's draining me, but you full well knowing that anyway, that this is an energy draining activity for him. Okay, great. I need to do something in return.
It fulfills me.
But it's fulfilling you, so it's filling you full of energy, and I know when then you're full of that energy, you will then reciprocate to me what fills me full of energy that may be draining to you. And it doesn't have to be, I'm just saying, like, and there can be this very natural flow of when one is heightened or one is fatigued, or, we have done this quite often, I've realized, in our last years of operating in this way.
And I think that, whatever those needs are, when you're navigating this with somebody else, it again, it highlights the real importance of explicit communication, doesn't it? Because for me to say, this is something I need, and to have the confidence to and heal through the trauma and the shame of coming to going, this is what I need from you, when you're able to give it to me. And you not going, oh, sod that, I don't want to do that. Like, that understanding and the listening to that and listening to my intuition has been a huge part of that journey, I think.
Well, I think, yes. And as you say, and it's actually, it's interesting, that first voice of like, oh, sod that, or whatever it is, it's actually also not ignoring that voice either. Like, if that is my initial first response, one, don't immediately voice that, keep that in. Like, this is the interesting, and I think this will be a good segue into our next podcast on speaking truth. So I think we'll wrap up here in a second about listening, but I think for me it was just that case of that first voice that crops up is like, you living in truth doesn't mean blurting out that very first emotion that comes up. That was an emotion, like you say, it came from one of my personifications somewhere. Something said, oh, sod that, I don't want to do that. Listen to that and then articulate what that truly means. Does that mean I'm in a depleted place and need to restore my energy before I can give? Or does it just mean that right now is not appropriate and I can't give that? Or does it mean I just need to find some way of navigating that until it appeases whatever that feeling was in me? It might not even be connected, you're right? It could just be the stresses of the day. It was just the wrong time to ask that question, and the stresses of the day caught me off guard, and that immediate emotion of, oh, sod that, not reacting to that, but still holding that and going, oh, what was that? Why was that there? I think that's an important part of the process, as you say, listening to your voices and making sure you're hearing the other person, as well as acknowledging your own, and not because that's the same as you saying in the past you've been suppressed. You've had a voice come up internally, but you suppressed it because you didn't feel you could speak it in that sense.
Yeah, and I think this is something I know that other people kind of experience is when we are talking, and this kind of mirrors the listening, the active listening, is when one of us is talking and it triggers the other not to interrupt, not to butt in. And that's really difficult, something we've had to really intently work on, and still do, but intently work on to give that other person space to speak freely without interruption, because sometimes interruption can shut somebody down, even if you don't intend it to. But then there's also, you struggle with this more than me, I think, about remembering the point that you wanted to say.
Yes, so my thing is I usually want to say, but this is a problem. I usually want to respond, and this isn't just between us. I realise I do this all the time with people. The reason why I usually want to respond and talk over people, I even had to do it just in that moment, and I thought just hold my tongue a second. It's just because I'll forget, or I'll want to respond to a specific point of what you just said. Although I am learning that in sometimes just shutting up and listening for a bit longer, you'll tend to say it anyway, or follow up or round off the subject. But I think that covers essentially what we're trying to get out with Phoenix here. It's choosing what those things are, paying attention to what's around you, which was kind of bringing Kintsugi along, in the broken pieces, and then choosing from there, moving forward in a very conscious choice.
The explicit choice, isn't it? And I think if I was going to summarize Phoenix for me, it's about rewriting the rules, knowing self, making choice, and not being afraid to rewrite the rules of a relationship that you want, that don't fit into the boundaries that society create around what is a marriage or what is a friendship or what is a partnership.
Even these labels themselves, you're right, they come with connotations, don't they? And we know when we choose a particular word, it holds weight. Why do I call you my wife to certain people, even though we're in union? Or you're right, the language, social conditioning. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Because I also feel it holds more weight if I said partner. It sounds like I'm not as committed. Whereas, so even I know there's hang-ups on my own language, and yes, I suppose it's being aware of that, isn't it?
And owning those new rules in your relationship, dealing with any shame that comes up around them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But living in truth how you want to live your relationship, not how in the past you've lived it and it got to breaking point. Because if you're going to rewrite the past, then what's the point?
That's it. I think it has to avoid harm in any sense, whatever you decide and how to operate. I think if it's harmful to anyone or anyone else around you, then I think that's not a way to go forward with it. But whatever that is then beyond that, I think is entirely up to debate and up to be open, and is entirely what you make it.
Yeah, conscious choices.
Conscious choices, indeed. Wow. Well, that's been the Phoenix podcast. And so thank you for everyone for listening. We'll be wrapping up these introductory podcasts with truth. That's the next one.
And then who knows?
And then we'll see where we go from there. If you've enjoyed it, please share with anyone you know who may find this useful. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.